Welcome to our SIAM activity group on supercomputing session to launch our initiatives. We're excited to begin the third session in our three-part session today with Anshu Dubey, who will kick us off by speaking about some of her work in pursuing software as an instrument of science. And after she speaks, we'll have some informal Q&A time. And then we'll transition into introducing some new initiatives of our SIAM activity group that are intended to help advance inclusivity and promote all the great opportunities in high performance computing. So now I'm going to introduce Anshu. She is an expert in high performance computing. She's a computational scientist at Argonne National Lab, and she has many years of experience in working across the boundaries of both computer science and applied math, and also scientific computing, especially in the astrophysics area. So without further ado, Anshu.
Thank you, Lois. Thank you for that introduction and this opportunity to talk about a subject that is very close to my heart. So let me start sharing my screen. So the topic that I spoke about at SciMPP this year was software as an instrument of science, and what here are some of the excerpts from that talk. The reason why I thought about this is that when we think about any scientific discovery that comes from experiments, we know that they also started in the same way that many of the computational experiments started. You have a small one person or two people who are intrigued by some phenomena, want to understand it, and therefore set up an experiment and run it, and they draw inferences. But then as things keep growing and growing and growing, the same ideas and any experimentation you want to do with them keep on getting more and more complex. So what used to be the kinds of insights that were coming from Rutherford experiments, now you need LHC, the Large Hadron Collider, to run experiments in atoms to make new discoveries. The thing is, though, that for the transition from a single person experiment to a facility like LHC, there is a proper interaction and governance model in place. It is understood that this is an experimental, that is an expensive facility, and that it should, in order to use well and in order to do good science with it, all these systems have to be in place. Well, so what happens in computational science? We also start with computational experiments where there are exploratory models and they're simplified with many approximations. And in the beginning, the typical stereotypical image that one has of doing these experiments is a PI and a student, or a PI and a postdoc. The difference from experimental facilities, though, is that even when models get really, really complicated, like you see in the right side of the figure here, people don't think about a proper governance and interaction structure in place. And it is only very few people still who are trying to manage every aspect of this code. And because they don't have resources at their command, they try to do everything. And in the process, they acquire technical debt. Technical debt is basically implementation that is without design and plan. So this is all quick and dirty implementation. That's all they have time for. But what ends up happening is that when you do implementation like that, it starts to collect debt, just like interest, just like debt does, and it compounds. And so when you want to add features later, you have to put in more work. And many a times this has been a cycle that we have all encountered, that enough technical debt got acquired that the code eventually became useless, had to have a hard reset and start all over again, which is not a particularly great way to do things. Instead, if we were to have a picture like what I'm showing in this slide, where an interaction and governance model in place, different people with different expertise assigned the responsibility for understanding different aspects of the scientific process, then computational science can also flourish. And I think we are at the tipping point in many areas, in many scientific domains, where we have to go to this model in order to continue to be productive, and we have to rethink how we approach computational science and experimentation and scientific discovery with computational science. So I had the privilege of starting my career seriously in a group that approached the second model that I showed you. So this was Flash. The code was written for astrophysics. In February this year, actually, I made the announcement in my SciMTP invited talk. The new incarnation of that code is called FlashX. So it was originally developed at the University of Chicago and Argonne National Lab under the ASC, the Department of Energy's National Nuclear Security Administration's Academic Alliance program. It started in 1998 and the first code release was in 2000. That was basically a smash of 3 already existing codes that had completely different coding styles. And so it took 2 rounds of refactoring to better software, architect the code better and turn it into what has been a very well-sustained software system for astrophysics. And it branched out to many other communities, such as even biomechanical systems and fluid structure interactions, because we invested in design and software architecture. The newest incarnation has been architected for heterogeneous platforms, and it is available on GitHub under Apache 2.0 license. This is a range of computations that have been done with Flash and FlashX, and they range for things like this bubble formation in different influences of gravity, and then a whole bunch of stellar systems, then the modeling of laser plasma experiments. All of these have been modeled with Flash in the past. The reasons why Flash was successful in this regard is from the beginning, there was a recognition that our science is only as good as the software that produces it. So if you have not very well tested, very good software, then the experiment and the science you can do with it is also effectively not going to be very good. And because of that, there was attention to quality, and because the same software was going to be used to do many kinds of experimentation, it was built with composable architecture. But an even bigger factor that led to the success of Flash was sustained funding. What it did was it gave us a chance to experiment with the design, make prototypes, and ultimately come up with a design that has stood the test of time. So FlashX is, as I said, the newest incarnation, and it was funded under the Exascale Computing Project of the Department of Energy, which was meant to ready applications for software ecosystem and exascale platforms. What we've created is useful for wider science community, especially as we move to a community, because we have moved to a community development model. And again, as with the original ASC Alliance Center funding, a long-term sustained funding, the ECP funding has been critical for in our ability to explore the design space and create a useful product. In addition to what we do with Flash, we've had a support from a project which is a whole new concept in computational science. It is a project that's completely devoted to the idea of sustainability. And so the project is designed to think about what makes people productive and how to do better science with software products. And so this is just a snapshot of various activities that IDEAS does. It is through outreach, through webinars, tutorials, other interactions, and other things. And what has been happening through the IDEAS productivity is that better and better software process has been getting incorporated in FlashX and in other projects that have interacted with IDEAS and benefited from the combined expertise of people that are participating in there. And then the third aspect that the community as a whole is moving towards is having standard platforms for computational experiments. So this is my colleague, Kate Keehee, who has built this Chameleon, which is where people can run their computational experiments in a completely reproducible way, and others can reproduce their results and run their experiments. And this is changing the paradigm of scientific computing with software. So I want to leave you with this thought that imagine all the possibilities of great scientific discoveries that can happen when you have highly capable software like FlashX, not necessarily FlashX, but software like FlashX, which has paid attention to design and extensibility, that has support for sustainability and quality from projects like Ideas Productivity, that is just disseminating that expertise, combined expertise in the community, that can run experiments on platforms like Chameleon. We would just, I think the science would benefit, and there'd be no end to invention and discovery that can happen. If you want to look at the more in depth, the whole presentation, it's available on Figshare, and this is the DOI for that experiment. And that's all I had. Thank you for listening to me.
Thanks, Anshu. Really wonderful introduction to these challenging issues with software. We'll open up the floor now for questions. If anyone would like to ask Anshu a question, feel free to unmute and ask away.
I had a question, just sort of like what your thoughts are on moving legacy modules forward, where if you're working on something like Phoenix and you have to integrate to Dolphin X is built on a lot of like super old legacy modules that use like C, like the 2008 standard, but Dolphin X was built with C20 in mind. So is it worthwhile to bring some of these modules forward so that you can actually containerize the application and have it be more portable, or is it just something that you should leave alone and focus on a more specific task?
It depends on the kind of code components you're dealing with, right? If they're critical for your application, you don't really have a choice. You have to figure out a way of making them work, either in the new environment or somehow provide a way for them being able to plug into the new environment. That said, in most situations, what ends up happening is that there is advancement in numerical methods and there is advancement in understanding of models. So in a natural course, some of those code components become obsolete and need replacement. So for example, in our experience, in the beginning, the codes, like I said, it was an amalgam, a forced marriage of three codes, and they were built in Fortran 77. And there are elements of Fortran 77 that still exist in the code today, but we've isolated them. And you know, in that sense, there is a backward compatibility in all of the compilers, in that the simplest form of the code in any language, they'd still compile. So it's the for the purposes of maintenance, you have to isolate those sections as much as possible. And if you can modernize them, you can modernize them, but that's not always possible.
Okay, so it's more beneficial sometimes to just leave it and try to isolate it as much as you can from the newer components. But in some cases, you just have to bring forward because.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Just
you
another
have to
question.
Play by the ear. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no general rule, I guess. Just curious, because it's always been a problem where like X tensor is like 2008 last stable build I found, but you still need to use it for like C++ 20, and it's in like C98, and you get a lot of problem with standard library. Just one question as well about how you maintain like a development environment versus an actual running environment. Because when you're trying to experiment and get your code up and running, it's helpful to do it on a local machine. But often when you push to sort of an HPC environment, you encounter errors where you have existing things on your system that make it run that aren't present on your non-connected compute nodes. So do you have like practices you like to employ? Like, are you a fan of CMakes, virtual environments? What do you like to use?
Not necessarily. So what I have found to be useful is to do regular testing and do it on multiple platforms and multiple software stacks. Because some compilers are more tolerant of certain kinds of errors than others are. And if you run it on multiple software stacks, whether you do it in the form of a virtual environment or you do it in on actual platforms, the defects are sort of weeded out slowly one by one when you run it on multiple platforms. It has always been. And then we run it with different levels of optimization and different levels of debugging. So basically, the same test you run in some 3 or 4 configurations, and you find that one configuration will run through, but the other one won't. So this is how we eliminate the easier to find bugs, but that still, as we all know, that still doesn't eliminate the bugs that you would find perhaps at scale or in a brand new environment that, the really high new machines, the bleeding edge machines, come with their own problem because their own software stack is not particularly robust. And so you run into all kinds of problems. So the other approach that we take is we take a stable version of the code, tag it, and create a branch out of it for a production a campaign, and then do targeted testing of that branch on the platform, on the target platform ahead of time, and try to do things like pathfinder runs, exploratory runs, and dedicate some time to make sure that that branch is effectively working right. And then we don't merge the development part of the code into that until the campaign, that specific campaign, is finished. I don't know that that's always possible, but that Bebog has succeeded in doing it, and it has been useful.
Okay, thank you for the talk and answering my questions.
Sure.
Any further questions for Anshu? All right, if not, we will thank Anshu again, and now we'll launch into another section of our session here, a fun poll. So while you guys are considering the poll, I'm going to stop recording.